South China Morning Post, 19th of April 2024, decades of incarcerated ethnic Nepali political detainees in Bhutan await justice. Chinese agents have been apprehending Bhutanese citizens while impersonating Nepalese nationals. Over 3 decades ago, when Bhutan began forcibly expelling its ethnic Nepali population, Dil Kumar Rai and thousands of others escaped to neighboring Nepal. However, a covert visit to his relations still residing in the kingdom resulted in his incarceration. Rai was apprehended and convicted in 1996 of his involvement in an anti-government insurgency as an extremist and antinational. For his conviction, he was sentenced to 21 years in prison. Upon his release in 2017, his residence in Sipsu Gola Bazaar, near the Indian frontier, had been completely demolished. "I had no money, citizenship, or place to live," Rai, now in his late 50s, explained to This Week in Asia. "Although I desired to remain in Bhutan, the country lacked possibilities. Consequently, even though I would be a refugee, I traveled to Nepal." Rai, along with several thousand other Bhutanese exiles currently residing in Nepal, emigrated to the country after serving their prison sentences. According to rights organizations and former political prisoners with whom This Week in Asia spoke. However, Bhutanese jails continue to hold dozens of men similar to Rai, who are considered political prisoners due to their extended prison terms. Human Rights Watch stated in a 2023 report that it had gathered data on 37 political detainees detained in Bhutan from 1990 to 2010, however, the actual number may be considerably greater. 24 of them were incarcerated for life, whereas the remaining inmates were sentenced to 15 to 43 years in prison. In the report, Meenakshi Ganguly, Deputy Asia Director at Human Rights Watch, stated regarding the nation's happiness measurement, "Bhutan's publicly promoted principle of gross national happiness fails to account for these wrongfully convicted political prisoners who have been incarcerated for decades." She further stated that the Bhutanese government should immediately rectify the situation. An eerie past. The Lhat Shampas, an ethnic Nepalese community comprising approximately 1/6 of Bhutan's previous population, were forcibly evicted between 1989 and the early 1990s after the implementation of a one nation, one people policy. A consequence of the campaign was the mass denationalization of numerous Lhat Shampas, which compelled over 100,000 of them to relocate to Nepal. Thousands of Bhutanese refugees had established themselves in compounds in eastern Nepal by 1992, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency (UNHCR). Between 2007 and 2016, 113,500 refugees were resettled in third countries. Approximately 6,000 Bhutanese refugees are presently present in Nepal. Ram Karki participated in a primary teacher training program in Bhutan 1990 when thousands of ethnic Nepalese ethnicities staged their initial human rights protests in southern Bhutan. In this region, the majority of the Lhat Shampas resided. Identified individuals who were in the streets were given 24 hours to leave the country, Karki stated. Bhutan has implemented several political reforms in the 30 years since the ethnic cleansing of its Nepal-speaking population. These reforms include the country's 2008 inaugural National Assembly elections and its transition to presidentialism. In anticipation of the January inauguration of a new government led by liberals, political prisoners' families and activists hope measures will be taken to secure their release. Associate Professor Susan Bonnke of the University of Sydney stated in This Week in Asia that Bhutan continues to label its political detainees as criminals, and the government's refusal to release them indicates that it is unable to abandon this narrative. Bonnke stated, "This reflects poorly on democracy as it implies that individuals ought to maintain their apprehension towards expressing themselves." However, the matter concerning the release of political prisoners is uncomplicated, as such a course of action would be advantageous to the government's public relations efforts. Advocates for their release. Karki stated in July 2019 that a third party on Facebook forwarded him a handwritten letter from a political prisoner in Bhutan. It suggested that individuals relocated to other nations may have forgotten our plight and requested that Karki address the matter. Karki, who was granted political asylum in the Netherlands in 2003, has resided in the Netherlands since then. With the assistance of Human Rights Watch, he initiated the documentation of information about Bhutanese political detainees still incarcerated. Additionally, he engaged in diplomacy to garner global backing for his cause. Human Rights Watch and Kharki were able to locate information on 37 of them, of which 2 have been made public since the HRW report was published. Approximately 15 of the 37 were found guilty in the 1990s for demonstrating against the maltreatment of the Nepali community. The remaining individuals were incarcerated while visiting family members they had left behind or assisting the returnees. It is reported that a considerable number of them are incarcerated in Shamgong Central Prison, which is situated near the capital city of Thimphu. Others are believed to be in Rabuna and Paro prisons. Rai, who was incarcerated in Shamgong until his release in 2017, stated that conditions were deplorable there. Inmates were not provided with adequate medical care or sustenance and were forced to defecate in buckets. Rai also claimed to have been subjected to torture while in police detention, including police officers stamping on his hands and chest and depriving him of sleep. When democracy arrived in Bhutan, I was incarcerated, but that made no difference to the political prisoners, he explained. Upon its 2019 visit to Bhutan, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention observed that a considerable number of detainees were incarcerated under national security legislation, with a significant number of them being sentenced to life imprisonment. According to the report, the working group was informed of several due process violations. Amnesty was the only viable option for those serving life sentences. The monarch of Bhutan possesses the authority to grant amnesty. In 2022, His Majesty King Jigme Khesar Namgyal Wangchuk granted the pardon of a life-sentenced political prisoner. In 1999, Jigme Singye Wangchuk, his father, liberated 40 of them. Kharki stated that the government of Bhutan has nothing to fear from us. The political prisoners do not pose a threat. The government should release them on humanitarian grounds. The Bhutanese Ministry of Home Affairs failed to respond to This Week in Asia's inquiries via email. We are in purgatory. On humanitarian grounds, Shantaramacharya was released from Bhutan's prison in 2014, approximately 7 years after his apprehension while endeavoring to return to his country of origin. He stated that the brutality he was subjected to during his incarceration rendered him below the waist paralyzed. Most of Acharya's family members had been emancipated in the United States when he returned to Nepal. Presently, he and his spouse reside in one of the 2 Bhutanese refugee settlements in Nepal. He stated that he is financially dependent on others and has outstanding medical expenses following coronary artery bypass surgery that occurred a year ago. I was sick and completely alone when I returned to Nepal from prison, he told This Week in Asia, adding that he hopes to see his nearly 80-year-old mother again. According to Samdesh Shrestha, the chief of mission for the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, in Nepal, in 2004, the ICRC obtained authorization from the Bhutanese authorities to organize family visits. During these visits, the conditions of the institutions were also evaluated. The visits ceased in 2012, and Bhutan declared it had implemented measures to enhance prison conditions according to ICRC standards and recommendations. Although prison visits resumed following the COVID-19 pandemic, Shrestha told This Week in Asia that family visits have been unlikely due to other circumstances, without elaboration. Don Bahadur Bosnet stated that in 2008, his brother Nandalal Bosnet traveled to Bhutan for their absent sibling Kul Bahadur Bosnet. Nandalal was apprehended for treason and is presently incarcerated in Shamgong for life. Since 2014, we have been unable to reach him by phone or contact him, Don Bahadur, whose family currently resides in the United States, told This Week in Asia. Having difficulty making a phone call makes it difficult to maintain optimism regarding his release. Human rights advocates have consistently demanded that the Bhutanese government establish such measures. Referring to the Human Rights Watch report, Diksha Alongasing, executive director of South Asians for Human Rights, stated on This Week in Asia, there has been little progress on the release of political prisoners since 2023. The Bhutanese government has neither acknowledged its political prisoners nor taken a public stance on this matter, Alongasing stated. Rai stated that many of the remaining refugees live in ambiguity at the Nepalese refugee camp. He compared his release from prison to resuming life, but his daily activities have remained the same since then, and he sees little potential for improvement shortly. He stated, "We do not wish to be permanent refugees. Upon departing Bhutan in my 20s, I retained vivid recollections of my native nation. Should the government opt to repatriate us, I shall promptly repatriate."